Good day and welcome to the webinar, New Features in SmartView 11.1.2.2. Lots of numbers there. My name is Craig Messenring. I represent HCG. We're a company based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and we provide consulting, training, product sales, tools, custom tailored applications in the business intelligence software arena, specializing in Oracle, Hyperion, EPM. We're a certified gold partner as far as consulting goes and sales and so forth. And we are an approved education center with two education centers, one in Phoenix, Arizona, and one here in beautiful Minneapolis. And we provide live training, live virtual training, meaning over the internet like this webinar, on-site training at your site as opposed to live training in one of our approved education centers. Those kinds of things. And in the support and development area, we do S-based add-ons, custom tailored applications, sales of product and installation of product, those kinds of things. The assumption on this webinar is that you are somewhat familiar with SmartView, and even if you're not, that's no big deal. However, you might not understand the newer features without having a little bit of a grounding in SmartView, or at least the older spreadsheet add-in. Now, the disclaimer here is that the topics discussed in this webinar are rather brief discussions. For complete explanations with examples and activities, although I do have examples today, of all these things and vastly more, we do have two SmartView classes available, a one-day SmartView for S-based course and a two-day SmartView automation course in which you learn Visual Basic for applications and how to write macros and include SmartView functions within those macros. So to start things off, we'll go over a little bit of the S-Base and SmartView history. SmartView actually began in version 7 of S-Base, which was before Oracle bought Hyperion, and it had rather limited usage capabilities, and besides that it was an extra cost feature. And I note also in the third bullet there it says Connection Manager. SmartView has gone through a few different methods of connecting to the data sources which SmartView can report on. In System 9 of S-Base, there were some improvements, but still not what I would call a usable product. And once Oracle bought Hyperion, then SmartView became bundled with S-Base as opposed to a separate cost feature. Then along came 11.1.1. and something called the Data Source Manager replaced the Connection Manager and made life much easier to connect to your various data sources via provider services connections. Besides provider services, there are other ways of connecting. And it added a couple of features called Smart Slices and the Report Designer, which are covered again in the SmartView course. Along came 11.1.2. Then something called the SmartView Panel, which exists to this day, replaced the Data Source Manager. And I'll be pointing out a few things on the SmartView Panel today. And as long as you have Excel 2007 or higher, it also brought along with it the Data Source Context-Sensitive Ribbons, which means if you connect to an S-Base data source, you've got an S-Base ribbon with the commands appropriate for S-Base data sources. If you connect to a planning data source, you have a planning ribbon with the commands appropriate for a planning data source, rather than having all the commands in one ribbon like the original versions of SmartView did. And they redesigned the options dialog. There are now 6 categories of options as opposed to the old tab method of getting at options. Then came 11.1.2.1.102, where in that version there were many new command and option enhancements. They redesigned the member selection dialog. They brought along support for Office 2010, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the level you minimally want to be at in order to use SmartView to its best capabilities. But then came 11.1.2, and they added even more features that we're going to discuss today. And from a client point of view, if I remember to show you, I'm using client 11.1.2.2.310, which was released on January 23rd, and the 11.1.2.2.300 version brought along a couple of new features. And I'm not quite sure what the difference between 300 and 310 is, but at least I'm up to the latest version now. So here's a summary of those new features. If you have 64-bit Microsoft Office 2010, you can use it now. They've added some logging level options, which I personally don't use all that much, but it might be important to you. There's the new panel and connection buttons. The panel button replaced the old open button for those of you who might have been or might still be on an earlier version of SmartView. There's an Excel formatting enhancement I'll show you. There's one extra added feature on the cascading feature. Hopefully you know what cascading is, but they've added one extra thing to it. There's a completely new tool called Smart Query. That's probably the biggest thing. And then for those of you who do automate your S-based reporting via Visual Basic for application macros that include SmartView functions, well, guess what? There are new SmartView VBA functions. And then, as I said in the previous slide, at version 11.1.2.2.300, they added a couple of new features, a newer function builder. The function builder existed in the past, but now there's a newer, sleeker function builder also with some new functions available to build with it. And there's something called in-cell POV. Some of you might be familiar with viewing your POV in the toolbar, and now you can view it on the grid, not only on the grid, but you can access member selection via it on the grid. But I'll show you all of those things coming up. So the first enhancement is simple. If you're moving to a 64-bit version of Office, then you better get 11.1.2.2. Secondly, again, there are some new logging features. There's an option that's been around for quite a while called Log Message Display, and it has two new choices. That Log Message Display option is found in the advanced category of options that I'll show you on the next page. And the two new choices are extended information, which brings you not only the information level messages, but it gives you the server responses and requests. And with that extended information, guess what? You're building up the log file more and more, which can adversely impact performance. And then there's a profile selection, which gives you not only the extended information, but more information. And its basic intent is for debugging. So if you're in a debugging mode, that will certainly help you. But it will then impact performance. So here is the options dialog. Here's the advanced category of options if you're not familiar with the options dialog. Here are the 6 different options categories. Here is the logging portion of the advanced category, and here are the 2 new choices in the log message display dropdown. So prior to this, they had information, warnings, errors, and none, but now they've added these other 2. All right. Onward to something that you're going to use more often, presumably, is the panel button. There used to be a button on the ribbon, on the SmartView ribbon, that said Open. Now it says Panel. And there's also next to the Panel button a new Connections button, which has in it actually 4 items. I'm only going to talk about 3 of them here. One called Active Connections, which can be handy for connecting a sheet without having to go to the SmartView panel. If you have private connection, that's one of the first criteria, and you have to know what a private connection, then you can connect to any one of your previously connected private connections to this active connections list. One private connection be set as a default connection, so there's a reset command in that new connections button. and by pressing it, you will set the current sheet's connection to the default connection. So if I'm connected to Sample Basic, that will become my default connection. And one I like most recently is this recently used selection, where anything that you connect to, no matter whether it's private or shared connection, it will appear in the recently used list, and it really the easiest method of connecting a sheet to a data source. You just select the data source. If you haven't signed on already, it will ask you for your password, user ID and password. You enter those, and it will automatically then connect to the database and do the initial refresh of data. Now, the number of items that appear in that recently used list are controlled by another option, the number of most recently used item option in that advanced category. If I go back one slide here, you can see there's number of most recently used items set initially to 9, and offhand I can't remember what the maximum is. But also notice that if you don't like your most recently used items showing up, you can delete all of your most recently used items by pressing that button there. Most recently used items also appear in the Smart View panel. So here's the new panel button. Here's the new connections button. And underneath connections, we have 4 choices here. But reporting and analysis doesn't apply to Essbase, so I only talked about active connections, set to default, and used. And again, if you select recently used and you want fewer or more items to appear in that list, change this option in the advanced category of options, or delete all of your most recently items. Here's an actual command that might help you. Now, as explained in my SmartView class, there's a certain method of creating a report that you're going to want to save for production use. And one of the last steps in creating a production report is the formatting of that report. Make it look nice. And generally speaking, you want to avoid doing any further zooming in, zooming out, pivoting, keep only, remove only after you've done your Excel formatting, because if you do that, if you do any of those commands after you've done your Excel formatting, generally speaking, you're going to lose the formatting, or more precisely, the formatting will stay in the cells, in the Excel cells in which you placed the formatting, and not be moved to the new cells if you do a zoom in, so to speak. It will just stay formatting the old cells, if you will. And this move formatting on operations option is a sub-option to using Excel formatting, as you see here in the formatting category of options. And it can be used with member cells or data cells, but in my brief testing of this, I found it works more consistently with data cells, and that's what I'm going to show you in an example here. Here I've got 4 dimensions in my 5-dimension database shown here. Don't worry about the 5th dimension at this point. And notice that I have my East quarter 1 and 2 numbers colored in yellow and my West quarter 1 and 2 numbers colored in green. If I did not have this move, move formatting on operations option checked, then anything I did further, Essbase-wise, these 8 cells would remain formatted the way they are. They wouldn't follow the data. So now on the next one, I have pivoted my quarters from the rows up to the columns, and lo and behold, my East quarter 1, 2 numbers are yellow, and my West quarter 1 and 2 numbers are green. The formatting followed the data, and that's what I would like to have in case somebody does a pivot while they're looking at my production report. And the same is true if somebody then decides, you know what, I'm going to zoom in on West to show the states within West, and since West was in green, guess what? The states in the West also got colored green. So that is a handy new sub-option to Excel formatting, and allows you to then do things like zoom, keep and remove only commands after you formatted your report. Hopefully you know what cascading is. Cascading is creating many reports from one report by the selection of one of your POV dimensions and then selecting many members from that POV dimension. So if I have on display a report that shows me the total market numbers, I might want a report for every state in my market dimension. I can then cascade on that market dimension, which was in my POV, and select every state, and now that one report has cascaded, as they say here, into many reports, one for each state. And that has existed in the old spreadsheet add-in. It has existed in SmartView. So what's new in this version? Well, you either could cascade to the same workbook, which meant you got multiple sheets in the same workbook that you were dealing with right now, or you could say, I want multiple sheets in a new workbook. Well, now they've added this last option here, different workbooks, so that when I do my cascading, each sheet that's created, each report that's created, will be in one sheet on a brand new workbook for each one. Now, unfortunately, however, each workbook is given the name Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3, etc., etc. Not too great a naming scheme. And then the sheet within that workbook is actually named Market-East, if that was the POV member that you cascaded on, Market-West, Market-South, Market-Minnesota, whatever items you selected from your POV dimension, in this case market. So it would give each sheet the name, the dimension name, dash the member name. Each one in a different workbook. Now we move on to the big new feature, Smart Queries. You may remember the Query Designer, be that in the Spreadsheet add-in or SmartView, but the Smart Query goes beyond the old Query Designer. And do notice, SmartView is a product that's created for multiple data sources, but this particular Smart Query extension is only for S-base data source connections, not for your HFM connections, so forth and so on. And what you can do with it is create very highly complex queries. These queries you're going to build with a graphical user interface, but in the background what's being created is an MDX, multi-dimensional expression language query. And multi-dimensional expression language has many, many things that you can do to create highly complex queries. But the nice thing about this is you don't have to write that MDX code. The query gets associated with the sheet that it's on. However, you can take and copy and paste that query from one sheet to another, or you can even save that query into something called the repository, and then anytime you open up any other workbook in Excel later on, you can say, hey, I want to go back to that old query that I saved and bring that into this workbook. I'll show you all of these things coming up shortly. There's a lot of words here at the beginning. What are some of the Smart Query features? Well, as you know, in any SmartView report, you have to create dimensions and members in your rows, your columns, and your point of view. In Smart Query, you do that by creating one or more sets of members. And those sets of members can be created from member selection, as you might normally do in a SmartView report, or you can specify, I want this level of members, I want this generation of members, I want the children of the dimension, I want the descendants of the dimension, and even more than that. Once you've created one or many sets for the dimensions in your rows, columns, and your POVs, then you can actually filter those sets. Now this comes in handy for the dimensions that you have in your rows and columns, because you might have 50 items in your rows, and you say, you know what, I'd only like the top 10. And so you can create a filter on the set that created those 50 members and say, I want the top 10 based on some member in a dimension, presumably in your columns area. I'll show you examples of that. And there's actually, top and bottom is an easy filter to explain verbally and hopefully visualize in your mind. But there are other filters also. Filters on data, filters on searching for text, and even more than that. Yes, you can save the query into the repository. Yes, you can save a set. A set can be a fairly complex selection of members, and you might want to save that set for multiple reports. You can save that into the repository. A filter can be quite a complex thing in and of itself, and you can save the filter off so that you can use the filter in other smart queries. The sets refreshed with each query include metadata changes. Yes, that's true. That means basically if you said, give me the children of product, and today that produced 40 products, but the next time you run the query, if they've added 5 products and deleted 5 others, you'll get all of the current products. So that's a handy feature. You can create custom aggregates and members, but I'm not going to get into that. Yes, you can have multiple sets per dimension. Again, this is getting into the more complex areas of things, especially unions and exclusions of filters. You can have multiple filters and decide whether you want to join those filters together on one set or not. And you can sort based on the metadata, meaning the member names, or on the data, so that your report sorts very easily without having to resort to the Excel formatting. And all of this is done, again, via that MDX, multi-dimensional expression language, that a query is being built in that language based upon what you enter in the user interface. What's a set? Again, a little more explanation of it. It is a set of members selected for your rows, columns, or your POVs. And it can be a static collection of members, meaning I want market east, west, and south, but I don't want north. Or it can be a dynamic set of members, meaning I want the children of market, the descendants of market. And usually dynamic sets are better to go with because they're always interrogating the database outline to get the most current list of members. Or you can go into member selection, and via member selection, as you should know, there are static and dynamic methods of selecting members in member selection. And yes, you can select children's, descendants, level 0. You can even select custom members. So rather than you having to create a grand total with a formula, you can just use a custom member called total to get the grand total, count to get the count of members, average, etc., etc. You can read all of those. And yes, you can do a sorting on member names or data values or even the hierarchy itself. Filters are something that are applied to a set, and what they do, as a filter implies, is it limits the members that are in that set. So if I selected again 50 members to be in my rows, but I only wanted the top 10, I can filter it by the top 10. And I can filter it based on these other things also, but I'm not going to get deeply into those. So again, with sets, with filters, you can do a bunch of manipulation. You can have multiple sets per dimension. Can come in very handy the more complex your report is. You can have duplicate members in sets. So I can have the same member of a dimension appear many times in my rows or columns, should I want to for whatever reason. Duplicate members are allowed within one set, so it's sort of the same thing there. Not only can you save sets and filters for use from the repository, but you can copy, paste, delete, and rename sets and filters. You can clone sets. You can create a filter with a subfilter. All kinds of things you can do. The most likely one you're going to do is save the set and or the filter in a repository for use in other queries. So what's the process? And the process seems complex at first, but you get used to it quite easily. First, you have to connect it to a database in the SmartView panel. And then you select a new command in the panel called New Smart Query Sheet. And what happens is two things. That SmartView panel changes to its Smart Query pane inside of the panel. And then instead of the S-base ribbon appearing on that sheet, it will be replaced by the Smart Query ribbon, which has its own sets of commands for a Smart Query. Then you're going to select the dimensions and rows, you're going to select the dimensions for your rows, columns, and point of view. Once you've got those selected, you're going to select the members for those dimensions via these things called sets. Then, if necessary, you're going to create filters for the sets. And then you can add other options and save the query if you want to. And then if you decide, you know what, I'd like to see this in real S-base land, meaning I want to perform ad hoc operations like zooming and pivoting and so forth, there's an Analyze button in the Smart Query ribbon that will switch over to an ad hoc grid view of that Smart Query and will display the S-base ribbon from which you can do things like zooming and pivoting and all those kinds of things. Let me display a few things here. I'm going to close the Smart View panel for right now, and notice in the Smart View ribbon there's the panel button. And usually the panel will appear on the right side. I'll have it on the left side instead so that I don't have to scroll back and forth here. And usually when you get to the Smart View panel the first time, you're presented with a list like this: shared connections, private connections, and your most recently used items. And usually you will click on shared connections, and you'll right-click and you'll connect to a database, and then you'll right-click and do an ad hoc analysis, as basically I'm doing here. But notice, there are many panes in this panel. There's a shared connections pane. There's a private connections pane. I just click this drop-down next to the home icon. There's a document context pane, contents pane, I should say, which shows me that, yes, I'm connected to Sample Basic on the EPM 122 server here. And there's a task list pane, which has nothing to do with S-base really. And there you see, oh, there's a Smart Query pane here, from which I can press this open button to open up any saved queries. But guess what? I don't have any saved queries. So then the question becomes, how do I create a Smart Query? Well, if I go to Sample Basic here and right-click on it, you see there's a new command down here called New Smart Query Sheet. If you notice, I'm in Sheet 1 down at the bottom here, and let's see what happens. Notice I'm still in Sheet 1, but my S-base ribbon went away. There's no zoom in, zoom out, and so forth, and now there's a Smart Query ribbon here, and the Smart View panel changed to Smart Query, except now I'm in the creation of a Smart Query. You see rows, columns, and point of view, and all of that should be relatively familiar to you. And notice how year is already here in the rows and measures is in the column. That's standard S-base routine. It went out to the outline. It said your very first dimension in that outline is year, so I'll put that in the rows. Your second dimension in that outline is measures. I'll put that in columns. And any other dimensions I'll put in the point of view. Now watch carefully. I'm going to drag my product from my point of view to the rows here. And something will happen immediately when I press my left mouse button down on product. You see what happened when I clicked on product? It said sets for product, filters for product. I'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to drag my product up to rows here. And you see that I have product in my rows now. I've got year in my rows too. If I want year down in the POV, I'll drag it down to the POV. And notice, anytime I click on something, the sets for and filters for changes to whatever dimension I've just clicked on. I just clicked on year, so it says sets for years, filters for year. If I click on measures, it says sets for measures, filter for measures, so forth and so on. I'm going to go to product here, and now I want a set of products. Notice I can select base members. If I click on children, guess what? I got the children of my product dimension, which happens to be this. Notice I can change my alias table up here, so I'll go to my default set of aliases here, and there's my children of product. If I want the level 0 members of product, I click on that there, and I get my level 0 members of product added right where my cursor was. And sorry, it replaced the children and put in the level 0 members in its place. If I want to select members from the member selection dialog, as I normally do in SmartView, there's the other area, and I can go into member selection and select members there very simply. And then here's something else that's very handy, custom members. I want to show the total of product. There's the total of product. I want to show custom members the count of products. There's 16 of them, 134,000 total. And then I want the average. And hopefully 134,000 divided by 16 is 8,400. I'll let you figure that out for yourself. But you see how easy it is to add those custom members. And down here there's a repository command where if it took me 30 minutes to create that set, I might want to save that for future use, so I can save that set in the repository. I can do cloning, deleting, renaming, copying, all kinds of things. I create multiple sets via this add new set, and I can filter a set, and I can do sorting on sets. There's all kinds of things I can do. But just to show you a little something else, I'm actually going to take my market and move it up to my columns, and my measures I'll move down to my point of view here, and I'll click on market and select a set for the market of its children of market. I got east, west, south, and central here. Okay. Now if I want to create a filter for my products here, I first have to click on product again, and you see sets for product and filters for product. And you might think you go down here to create a filter, but no, you actually create a filter for a set. So when I right-click on the set, you see that there's an add filter. And it says product filter there. And I can do things like select top bottom. So I say, yeah, why don't you give me the top count. There's also percentages and sums, which is a longer explanation. Give me the top four. The top four based on what? Notice the OK button is grayed out at this point in time. I have to base it off of something. So I press this little add link, which opens up member selection and says, well, you select what you want to filter it based on. Presumably, you would want it on the dimension you have in the columns, so it selected market for me. I could select other dimensions, but I'll go with market, and I'll select the east market. Notice if I select the west market, it overwrites the east market. You can only do filtering based upon one set of numbers. So I'll click on that. It says market east there. I click on OK, and there are my top four right there: cola, birch beer, dark cream, and grape. So I just wanted you to see a little something about Smart Queries rather than me just talking about it. There's our Smart Query pane within the Smart View panel. Yes, you can create base member selections, children, descendants, level 0, and member selection. And yes, you can create custom member selections like total, count, average, so forth and so on. So here I have an example. The children of year is my set for my year dimension. That's why I've got quarter 1 through 4. I added a couple of custom members of total and average, and for my measures dimension here, which is in my columns, I just opened up member selection and selected margin, sales, and cost of goods sold. And yes, you can create one or more filters per set. So you select that set and you select the add filter command from the menu that appears when you select the set. And in this very simple example, once again, I just did give me the top two based upon the sales. So based upon the sales, those were my top two, quarter 3 and quarter 2. Simple example. Yes, you can save a set, you can save a filter, you can save a query. If you're going to save a set or a filter, there's a repository command followed by save set or save filter, which you access via the set or the filter. If you want to save the entire query, there is, up here at top, a save button here where I can save the entire query, give it a name, give it a description if I want. I'll save this query, click on OK, and I've just saved my query. How do I use it? I'll show you that in a moment. And it will save it for the server, the application, the database, and possibly the dimension, if it's a set or filter, that you created it from. So you can only use things for the same server, application, database, and possibly dimension. Now this Smart Query ribbon has got a bunch of nice things in it. One, you saw me change the alias table. Two, there's an automatic refresh button. I'll go back to live here. Notice the automatic refresh, when I click on it, it changes to manual refresh. What does that mean? If it's on automatic refresh, every time I change something here, you saw it change automatically here. Now if it's taking a long time to change because it's having to do a lot of work, you might want to say, I want to go to manual refresh. Then you can do 5 or 6 different things here, and finally when you're ready to see the result of that, you can press the refresh button. But for my simple examples, I keep it at automatic refresh. Yes, you can save the query. You saw me do that. Yes, you can copy and paste queries into other worksheets. The automatic or manual refresh I just talked about. So though that's a brief look at queries, and just for the sake of showing you something here, I'm going to go to Sheet 2. Normally, I would be in my shared connections in my Smart View panel. But let's say I wanted to go to Smart Queries here. And there's my Open button, which doesn't mean there's something in my repository, but I'll click on Open. And by golly, yes, there is something in my repository called this. And if I click on OK there, I'm get that query populated in now Sheet 2. Very simply and easily. And now I can go on my merry way changing it, editing it, and then saving it with a different name or over the top of the previous one. And another thing I think was mentioned in the book, but I might have missed it, there's an Analyze button here. If I press Analyze, notice that I'm on Sheet 2 right now, and I press Analyze. What has changed? Well, what you may not have seen is that the Smart Query ribbon changed to an S-base ribbon. And I'm truly in S-base mode now. So I can zoom out on this and then zoom in on root beer, and I'm in an ad hoc S-base querying mode. All right, moving on to another topic, because we need to get finished here at some point in time. There are new VBA functions. If you don't do Smart View automation already, this probably won't mean a whole lot to you, but I'll try to give some very simple examples. You're going to use these Smart View functions inside of a VBA macro. And this first new function called HIP, Get Member Information, is really based off of, if you didn't know, there's a command in the Smart View ribbon called Sheet Information. And it gives me a whole bunch of information here. But what I can do with automation is I can go and get not only the information from that, but 37 different pieces of information from my database about certain things. I have to specify what sheet I'm working on, what member I want to get information about, and what property I want to get the information about. And excuse me, I need to go back here one time. This has nothing to do with sheet information. This has to do with member information. Member information is in the S-base ribbon right there. I've selected a member called Old Fashioned here, and I see a whole bunch of information about it. And all of that information is available for me automatically via that new function. Notice there's this information, there's alias information, there's possibly attribute information. All that's available for me via the functions. I simply said, what is my consolidation operator for the cost of goods sold? Pardon me. I know that cost of goods sold is subtracted from my sales to produce my margin or whatever like that. I know it's a minus sign, but I'm just using this macro to find it out. And don't worry about this loop that says for and next, but basically it's coming back and saying the value of that property, the consolidation property, is 1, and 1 happens to mean subtraction. But it says I'll also give you the string piece of information if you put that into another variable, which I did call z here, which says, yes, cost of goods sold is subtracted from whatever to produce the parent. An active member. When I'm automating reporting, I need to know what members are where. So if I go into a specific dimension and say, tell me what member you have there, and it has to be in the point of view, it will then say, in the market dimension, load up this variable, which I called var member, and then I want to see it, and lo and behold, yes, south is what is the market dimension member in my POV at this point in time. Not only can I get the information, but I can set the information. South is my POV for the market, but in a macro I can say set the active member in market to east instead of south. And after running this macro, I've automatically changed the point of view in the POV toolbar. When I'm automating reporting, again, I might want to know which dimensions are where. Which dimensions are in the rows, which dimensions are in the columns, which dimensions are in the POV. And I get all of that information via this hip get dimensions. Go into this sheet and give me the dimension names in this variable, except it's called a variable array, and put the types, whether they're row, column, or point of view, which row equals a 0, column equals a 1, and point of view equals a 2, and put it into that variable array. And when I run this macro with this loop, for and next here, what I get is that year is a 0. Well, that's in the row dimension. Measures is a 1. That's in my column area. And product, market, and scenario are all 2s. They're up here in the POV. And then I can also rearrange what's on the sheet automatically via macro by using the set dimensions, where I can say set all of these dimensions that are, again, in an array variable, which again is taught in the 2-day automation class, and set them to these types. And again, 0 is row, 1 is column, 2 is point of view, so that I am now, here's what my sheet looks like before the macro. Product and market in the rows, scenario in the columns, and measures in year in the point of view. And I say set product equal to 0. Set market equal to 0, meaning both of those are going to be in the rows, and product and market are in the rows. Set scenario equal to 1, that means up in the columns, and set measures in year equal to 2, which puts them in the POV. And I have to do that via these variable arrays, dims, which I called it, and types, which I called it here, and use that hip set dimensions function. Hip get members from an F-based perspective is a way for me to find out what members are displayed currently for a dimension. So if I say hip get members, go into my market dimension and give me the member name in this variable Y and the member description in this variable Z, which for S-base is the same thing. It is the member name. There is no description in S-based land. Once again, I'm doing a loop, and I'm displaying that Y variable. That's my member names for my market dimension. And you can see on the sheet there's colas, root beer, and cream soda. And when I run this macro, I get the 3 message boxes of colas, root beer, and cream soda. And I can store those, all of that information away to use that further in my macro. If this, then do that. If this, then do that, kinds of things. And I can set the members in a POV dimensions, the ones that I want to select from. As you see right now in my POV, I've got year, and there's the member selection ellipsis. So the only member I have in my POV for the year dimension is year. Actual up here is for my scenario dimension. and I say set the members of the year dimension equal to quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4, and once I run that macro, quarter 1 through quarter 4 appear in my POV toolbar. And notice that year is gone because I didn't select that as a member to be displayed. I had to select the dimension first and the members separated by commas. All right, back to something a bit more understandable because it's available right in SmartView is this thing called the function builder. Now the function builder itself is not new. The interface is new, one, and these functions that are available are also new. And if you go to your SmartView ribbon, not your Essbase ribbon, there's a functions command, and there's a drop-down next to it, and you select build function. So just click on the drop-down and go to build function. Then you're presented with a list of all the functions that you can execute. And I've only highlighted the new ones here. Now, I'm not actually showing you a new one as the example here. I'm showing you something called HSGetValue, which is a very handy function for me to find out the intersection of one data point in my database via this function. And so I have to do two things. What database am I getting this information from? Sample Basic. And then I press this button here, which opens up member selection. And if I want an intersection, I have to specify one member from each dimension in my database that I want to get the intersection of. So I'm selecting January, sales, Diet Cola, Florida, actual. If I leave off any of the dimensions, it will default to the upper level, top level member, the generation 1 member, the dimension itself. And ultimately what that puts into my cell where I started from is this syntax, HSGetValue, get from this database the January intersection of year, the sales intersection of measures, the Diet Cola from products, Florida from the market, and actual from my scenario to produce the value that you get in the cell. Let me show you that quickly live here. I'll select a cell, any cell. Remember, it's in the SmartView ribbon. I go to Functions, Build Function. I say Get Value. Click on OK. Specify my selection. Since I'm on a sheet that's already connected, my drop-down says HSGetActive. I press this, and let's say it opens up the member selection, and I want the quarter 2 intersection from year, and the profit intersection from measures, and from product I want cream soda, and I'm going to leave off the other two. So notice market will default to market and scenario will default to scenario. I'm actually going to switch scenario to budget. But notice that the default for market is the top level market. Click OK, and in that cell you see the function there. And it says need refresh. I press refresh, and that's the value for that intersection. That can be very handy for finding specific data points and highlighting them in your report. If we want to look at a newer one of those functions, there's one called HSGetSheetInfo, and this is where I made my mistake earlier here. There is a command called SheetInfo, which shows me a bunch of information about this sheet. And if I want to find some information about this sheet and put it in a cell, I can go to Functions, Build Functions, HSGetSheetInfo, click on OK, and which sheet property do I want? I can get whether it's connected or not, what sheet type is it, what server am I connected to, etc., etc. I'll click on server, click OK, and you see it says EPM 122. Well, that's because I'm connected to server EPM 122, as you see here, and as you see here, server EPM 122. So it's an easy way of getting information about the sheet into your sheet, should you want that displayed maybe when you print it out. All right, this may be the last one here. I'm going to go to a new sheet here, and I'm going to connect to Sample Basic very briefly here. And I hope all of you know that nowadays the POV is either in row 1, or if you press the POV toggle, it's in the POV toolbar. That was something new, but not new to this version. So if I press the toggle again, my POV is up here. And whether my POV is in the toolbar or in the sheet, notice how I can click the drop down and I get the ellipsis, which opens up member selection, in which I can do many things. Well, if I switch my POV back over the grid, it looks like I've lost that ellipsis capability. Well, that's not true. When I click on anything in my row 1 POV, I get a drop down and I get the same thing here, and I can go along and select members and add them over here, click on OK, and now in that drop down I can shift from product to colas and refresh, and the number changes. And if I go to my POV toolbar by clicking the POV toggle, those same selections are here. So I switch to cream soda and refresh. There's a different number there. That's called the in-cell POV. You have to have a version 11.122.300 or later. And for those new features, I do have to thank Matt Millella from Oracle, who I found out about through his blog there. If you want to visit his blog, feel free to go to that web address, sbaselabs.blogspot.com. So the recap for today is support for 64-bit Microsoft Office. You've got to be up to the latest level. Some new logging level options. There's a new panel and connection buttons. There's one Excel formatting enhancement that can be quite handy. They've added one extra feature to the cascade to multiple workbooks. The whole new Smart Query feature, which you could spend multiple hours learning. Let's put it that way. There are some new VBA functions for those of you who do Smart View automation, and as of 11.122.300, you can use that new function builder and the in-cell POV. So remember, everything we discussed, except for the new VBA functions, are discussed in more detail with examples and activities in our one-day Smart View course or our two-day Smart View automation course. So if you have any questions about today's webinar, contact me via email, via phone. If you have interest in any training, please feel free to contact me or HCG more generically at any one of the phone numbers / websites. So thank you for attending today. Let me see what I've got in the way of questions here. This interface for reading the questions is quite hard. They make it quite difficult to read. So I have to read it one line at a time. Should I install 32-bit or 64-bit on a laptop with 64-bit Windows, with Windows 7 and 32-bit Office? Your guess is as good as mine there, Franklin, I think, at this point. So is there any way to show the MDX code for a Smart Query? That would be great, but I haven't seen it. Does the Smart Query get saved on the SBase server? That is true to my knowledge, but is it based upon your user ID? It might be saved locally. So again, sorry, I don't know the specific answer to that question. So all good questions, but something I haven't gotten into completely. So sorry about that. If you have any other questions, again, feel free to give me a call or send me an email. So thanks for attending today, and I hope to see you on the next webinar.